Our journey begins in the heart of France and the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane. Once a thriving village, it now stands as a symbol for the ravages of war. Dropping south, it's on to the region of Lot and the dramatic cliffside village of Rocamadour. We travel along the Dordogne River to the old port city of Bergerac, before going on to explore the castles and vineyards of the Lot Valley. It takes us to Cahors and its famed bridge. In the heart of the Midi-Pyrenees, we find the fourth biggest metropolis in France, Toulouse, that's home to Airbus Industries. From the walled city of Carcassonne, we travel deep into the foothills of the Pyrenees to end our journey at the formidable Puy-Laurens Castle. With its historic chateaux, medieval villages and rolling vineyards, southern France conjures images of a land filled with beauty and romance. A place nearly untouched by the modern world, where life is a seamless blend with the natural landscape. But it's also a place where the shadow of history still casts painful memories of darker times. At first glance, this village appears no different from any other in the region, but a closer look reveals a brutal atrocity from one of France's bleakest hours. These ruins are all that remain of Oradour-sur-Glane, following the Nazi occupation of World War II. An SS Panzer Division stormed the village on Saturday, the 10th of June, 1944. Residents were herded into buildings and locked inside, after which the entire village was set ablaze. Those attempting to escape the flames were shot. In all, 642 people were killed. Of those, 450 were women and children. It was the worst Nazi massacre of civilians in France. No evidence linking the village to the resistance movement has ever been found, and whatever may have prompted the attack remains a mystery. After the war, the charred ruins were declared a site of remembrance. The Memorial Centre was opened in 1999 to remember the crimes that took place here and honour those who lost their lives. It receives around 300,000 visitors a year who come to bear witness to the terrible fate that befell Oradour-sur-Glane. We now travel south to the rocky gorges of the Midi-Pyrenees. It's where we find Rocamadour and the buildings that have been clinging to the side of this rugged cliff for nearly 1,000 years. In 1166, Benedictine monks discovered what they believed to be the remains of the biblical figure St. Amador. He's said to have travelled to this site, where he built a hermitage in the rocky cliff overlooking the Alzou Valley. For the next few centuries, pilgrims flocked to Rocamadour, bringing wealth and prosperity. But by the 15th century, the visits began to decline, and the religious turmoil of the following century ended the great pilgrimage era altogether. Notre Dame of Rocamadour Sanctuary is carved into the limestone cliff and includes 7 separate chapels and shrines. It's listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Perched at the highest point in the village is the castle. It dates from the late 13th century. It's an ideal spot from which to take in the spectacular view of the valley below. The 19th century saw a resurgence of interest in Rocamadour. Today, the village of only 600 receives more than 1 million visitors each year. We continue across the rich green valleys of the Dordogne, considered by many to be the birthplace of European civilization. traces of human habitation go back over 400,000 years. More recent evidence of occupation is the picturesque Château de Fenelon, a 13th century castle above the village of Saint-Mondan. A vision of tranquility, the Dordogne River is a fitting symbol of the rustic spirit which so characterizes life in this region. But with such a peaceful landscape, it's difficult to imagine the turmoil it's seen through its history. Celts and Romans have come and gone, as have tribes of Eastern Europe. It's seen hostilities between the English and French, as well as fierce religious conflict. Testament to centuries of strife are the many castles dotted throughout the region. This is the 12th century fortress Château de Castelnau. It was built by a supporter of the Cathars, a religious group whose views directly oppose those of the Catholic Church. It was finally abandoned after the French Revolution and fell into disrepair. But by 1966, Castelnau was officially listed as an historic site and has since undergone several restorations. Although tourism has greatly increased over the past century, agriculture remains the core of the economy in Dordoigne's fertile river valley. Grapes, truffles, foie gras and walnuts are amongst its produce. This area is also France's top producer of strawberries and tobacco. For centuries, farmers relied on the river to transport their crops. This reliance gave rise to important trading centres, such as the old river port of Bergerac. Back in the 1200s, the city was a bustling crossroads with the distinct advantage of possessing the only bridge on the river. The town developed into a thriving commercial hub. Bergerac later played a vital role in the resistance movement during the Second World War, rescuing countless Allied airmen shot down in the surrounding area. But today, air travel has a far friendlier role, since it's the preferred mode of travel for the many summer tourists coming to the region. They come not only to experience the scenic beauty, but also to enjoy some of the best wines found anywhere in the world. The environmental conditions here allow cultivation of a wide variety of grapes. It's no wonder winemaking is so central to life in southern France. Our next stop is a grand residence that was once passed down 24 generations of the same family. Château de Biron represents 800 years of fortress architecture, beginning with its construction in the 12th century. Styles from various periods in the castle's long history can clearly be seen. Biron fell on hard times during the religious wars of the late 16th century, when the family lost favour with the king. The estate's owner was executed, and it's said his ghost still walks the ramparts, with his head in his hands. The absence of later additions to this next fortress, the Castle of King Dukes, suggests an ongoing change of hands. It's an excellent example of the design found during the English reign over this region in the Middle Ages. It has all the elements of other Welsh castles from that time. However, recent renovation has perhaps captured some of its former glory. As we make our way to the River Lot, we pass Castelfranc, founded in the late 13th century by the Bishop of Cahors. Since vines were introduced to the region around 50 BC, winemaking has been the cornerstone of the small village economies here. They're known for producing some of the most prized Malbecs in the world. Further along, where the river doubles back on itself, is Luzec. This ancient place even predates the arrival of the Romans. But the river's history runs much deeper, and over time, the Lot's meandering has created other impressive land formations, such as this escarpment near the farming village of Parnac. These vineyards, at the heart of the Cahors region, represent centuries of winemaking history. A stretch of road winding along the edge of the escarpment makes for breathtaking views of the vineyards below. For many visitors and locals alike, a favourite way to enjoy the beauty of the French countryside is travelling along one of the many scenic byways that crisscross the landscape. Cyclists and motorists from near and far come to enjoy a taste of the local atmosphere and attractions often missed on the main thoroughfares. Just down the river is another gem that's off the beaten path. The Château de Mercue was built by the bishops of Cahors in the 13th century. The formidable fortress served as an advance guard to protect the nearby city of Cahors. It helped secure the status of the bishops, whose power equalled that of any lord in the province. After the religious wars of the 16th century, the castle served as a refuge for 800 peasants left poor and destitute from the years of conflict. Work was offered to the men, and the war-ravaged fortress was rebuilt. New gardens were planted, and the orchards and arbours were restored. In the 1980s, it was transformed into a luxury hotel. A short distance away is the ancient city of Cahors. The site is almost entirely surrounded by water, which is probably what attracted the earlier settlers here almost 3,000 years ago. The first bishop of Cahors was appointed in the 3rd century. The level of power gained by the bishops over the next millennium would profoundly impact the city's prosperity. And by the 1200s, this place flourished as one of the foremost financial centres in all of Europe. Cahors Cathedral stands today as a symbol of that prosperity. The church was built in the late 11th century, but much of what we see represents the elegance of the architecture of the 1300s. The city's most beloved landmark has been the source of local legend for over 600 years. Plans for constructing a bridge across the River Lot began in 1306, but Pont Volontré took more than 70 years to complete, giving rise to a famous local legend. As the story goes, the builder made a pact with the devil to help with the construction. But the devil was cleverly tricked, and the builder kept his soul. Not to be outdone, it said the devil took a piece of the bridge each night, so it could never, ever be completed. But not only was it finished in 1880, it underwent an extensive restoration project, and a carving of a devil was placed at the top of one of the towers to commemorate the legend. In 1998, the Volontré Bridge was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For 75 kilometres, the River Lot winds its way through hills cloaked with dense forests and patchworks of farmland. The river's gentle pace makes it a splendid place to enjoy a leisurely cruise. Before the days of power motors, boats used for trading goods floated downstream easily enough, but had to be towed by teams of men or oxen when going against the current. The same spirit of determination must have also led to the establishment of one of the most scenic destinations in all of France, the cliffside village of Saint-Cirq La Popie. Perched 100 meters above the water, this site began as a fortress guarding over the river. Many of the buildings date between the 13th and 16th centuries. The town prospered until the arrival of the railway in 1886. Today, this place is considered one of the loveliest in France. The vast landscape surrounding the village is part of Côtes de Quercy Regional Park, home to an assortment of wildlife, as well as some of the oldest prehistoric sites in Europe. Our tour along the Lot River continues with Château de Sennevière. The family who built the castle in the 13th century retained ownership until after the French Revolution. It's been open to the public since 1957. After losing ourselves in the rich history of southern France, it's time to switch back to the present and Lalbenque Airport. For those brave souls with a penchant for excitement, a number of clubs and businesses devoted to adventure sports are active in this part of France. A successful landing. Well done. We bid farewell to the River Lot and travel southwest across the French countryside. We pass the rural village of Mirabel, one of the many charming villages that dot the vast landscape. A bit less charming, but no less important, is a Saint-Jory marshalling yard, located 15 kilometers from the station in Toulouse. France was first introduced to the railroad in 1827. But 25 years would pass before its arrival here. The railroad would ultimately revolutionize commerce and travel in the region. The once essential waterways, such as the Canal de Garonne, were rendered obsolete after the railroads were built. Like any great city, Toulouse has always adapted to a changing world. One sign of the modern era is the Ernest Valence Stadium, built in the 1980s. It's home to the rugby union club Stade Toulousain. The entire complex covers 10 hectares and is big enough to host more than 19,000 cheering fans. But if there's one thing that represents the pinnacle of modern Toulouse, it's the airport. This is the centre of aviation manufacturing for all of Europe. Blagnac, as the airfield is known, is home to Airbus Industries and the new A380. With a maximum capacity of over 850 passengers, it's currently the world's largest commercial aircraft. Manufacturing first began here in 1917 during the First World War. Since then, it's put together an impressive collection of historical aircraft to commemorate the city's aviation heritage. One of the centerpiece exhibits is the retired supersonic airliner Concorde. Its prototype made its first test flight here back in 1969. We leave the noise and excitement of the airport and head south across the farms of Aude to one of the finest examples of a fortified wall city in France. Carcassonne began as a settlement in the 6th century BC. Its strategic location between the Atlantic and Mediterranean seas led the city's rise as an important crossroads for travelers to Spain. In the 12th century, while other towns were plagued with turmoil between Catholics and Cathars, Carcassonne enjoyed a relatively peaceful time of religious tolerance. But that peace abruptly ended in 1209 when Crusaders invaded and occupied the city. Some 30 years later, the son of the executed lord made several failed attempts to recapture the city. 7 more years passed before the exile residents were finally permitted to return by order of King Louis IX. They settled in an area outside the walls, which became known as Lower Town. But tensions with the enclosed city continued. And by 1269, a second fortification wall had been built. After the French Revolution, around the turn of the 19th century, the walls and towers were plundered. By 1845, the castle and its fortifications were slated for demolition. But the ancient site was rescued when a painstaking restoration campaign began in 1846. It now stands as a prized example of medieval military architecture and has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Our journey takes us over the clouds as we near the edge of the Pyrenean mountain range. The earliest human remains ever found in Europe were discovered in these foothills. In 1971, paleontologists uncovered the skull of a human who had lived 450,000 years ago. In the 13th century, this rugged landscape provided safe haven for many Catars fleeing religious persecution. Today, the Pyrenees serve as a natural border with neighboring Spain. The mountains began their ascent around 40 million years ago, when the African and European plates collided. The Pyrenees were born atop a 500 million-year-old base. And it's here, amongst these mountains, where we find the last stop on our route. Tucked away on a peak overlooking the Boulzin Valley is one of the best preserved remnants of the Catar period in southern France. Puylaurens Castle was once the most southerly fort on French soil. It was first documented in 985, when it belonged to a nearby abbey, and later served as a refuge for Catars during the Crusades. Because of its remote location, the castle seems to have been spared much of the ravages wreaked upon other parts of the country. It was finally annexed under Louis IX sometime around 1250. It was rebuilt and fortified with the largest garrison on the entire border. After France signed the Treaty of the Pyrenees with Spain in 1659, the border was moved further south, and the castle lost its strategic importance. It was left abandoned for over 200 years. In that period, its towers and crenellated walls remained surprisingly intact, surely a testament to the ingenuity and skills of its medieval architects and builders. At the turn of the 20th century, Puylaurens returned to prominence when it was declared a national monument by the French Ministry of Culture. Today, a long and winding path from the village below leads visitors up to the rocky peak. The reward is the breathtaking panorama of the Pyrenees, as well as a well-earned opportunity to explore the ruins. And as with any self-respecting castle, Puylaurens even has a ghost. According to local law, it's of the restless spirit of a young noblewoman murdered by her husband. It's a tragic tale whose grimness is only matched by the beauty of its setting. A perfect place to end this journey.